Beneath the glittering chandeliers of James's palace, the atmosphere at this year's Royal Charity Gala had all the hallmarks of a grand, meticulously choreographed evening, an occasion where the British royal family donned its most dazzling and refined persona: floor-sweeping ball gowns, perfectly tailored tuxedos, the delicate chime of crystal glasses touching in polite toasts together. They formed a portrait of opulence so pristine it seemed nothing could disturb its regal composure. This was where power brokers, philanthropists, and royalty converged, where every speech was measured in words, glances, and pauses with almost scientific precision. And yet, tonight, within the flawless script, came a moment no one had seen coming. When Princess Charlotte, just 10 years old, stepped up to the podium, the room seemed to still, not out of surprise that she was there, but because her very presence carried an extraordinary energy. Bright yet steady eyes, a straight-back stance, a clear voice, and then, as each word left her lips, the audience found themselves drawn into an invisible current. Many had expected a few polite thank yous, perhaps a sweet anecdote about her family. Charlotte did neither. She spoke of compassion, of responsibility toward those less fortunate, and most strikingly of the role the younger generation can and should play in changing the world. No platitudes, no ghost-written fluff. The way she paused for emphasis, the way her gaze swept across the hall, it was clear this was a message Charlotte truly believed in, one she had already pondered deeply. The audience, including those who had sat through hundreds of speeches from heads of state, could not conceal their astonishment. Even the senior royals in the front row exchanged subtle glances, a mix of pride, surprise, and a quiet, unnamed apprehension. For in just a few short minutes, Princess Charlotte had achieved something that even seasoned elders sometimes struggled with: making people listen with their hearts, not just their ears. What gave a 10-year-old the power to do that? Was it a natural inheritance from a lineage steeped in public life, or the result of William and Catherine's thoughtful, intentional upbringing? Or was it something else entirely, a flame from within, the kind that made Charlotte not merely her parents' daughter, but wholly herself? With a voice capable of reaching millions, that question lingered in the minds of everyone present. And perhaps this wasn't just a speech. Perhaps it was a sign, however small, that a new generation of royals was beginning to write its own story in the glare of dazzling lights and under the astonished gaze of the world. That night, Asamoah Sink, James's palace resembled a living tableau of power and tradition. Crystal light danced off deep crimson velvet drapes, gilded chairs, and centuries-old royal portraits staring solemnly from the walls. The scent of white roses and lavender, arranged with impeccable care along the aisles, mingled with the strains of a chamber orchestra tucked into a corner, creating an atmosphere at once opulent and unmistakably royal. Every detail, from baccarat crystal stemware to the soft wash of light over each guest, was calculated to evoke the pinnacle of elegance and authority. As always, the most important faces of the monarchy were there. King Charles III sat in the place of honor, his expression composed but eyes carrying a flicker of fatigue, a testament to the challenging months behind him. Beside him, Queen Camilla maintained her poised demeanor, her sapphire blue gown catching the light with every subtle movement. Across the hall, the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine, appeared as the very embodiment of a modern yet traditional royal couple. And in the second row, amid glittering gowns and immaculate suits, Princess Charlotte sat poised, her eyes bright, yet carrying a quiet maturity beyond her years. The Royal Charity Gala has long been a familiar stage for the British monarchy, a night to celebrate philanthropic endeavors, strengthen bonds with the public, and uphold the royal image in a lavish setting. Traditionally, speeches were reserved for senior royals or renowned benefactors with years of public speaking experience. Which is why, when the organizers unexpectedly announced that Princess Charlotte, just 10 years old, would be taking the podium, a ripple of surprise swept through the hall. A ripple of whispers swept quickly through the banquet tables. Some guests smiled in amusement, expecting a charming little moment that might soften the evening's stiff formality. Others arched an eyebrow, curious to see what a child so young could possibly say in front of hundreds of influential guests, with every spotlight and camera trained directly on her. Even a few members of the royal family exchanged looks as if to ask, where did this idea come from, one thing. However, it was undeniable Charlotte's appearance instantly breathed a fresh gust of air into a room steeped in rigid protocol. In that instant, the gala ceased to be merely a ceremonial event. It became an open-ended story, one where the audience was eager to see what would happen when a young royal took center stage, not to wave or smile, but to speak with her own voice. Camilla, long accustomed to the unpredictable turns of royal life, couldn't quite mask her reaction. Her eyes widened, brows lifting in a flicker of surprise, mixed with cautious curiosity. Charles, seated beside her, leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady but alert, like a man ready to observe how this small piece on the royal chessboard might move in the game of public perception. Across the room, William and Catherine, though clearly caught off guard, reacted quite differently. Catherine offered her daughter a soft smile, leaning in to whisper a few words, her hand gently squeezing the small hand in hers. William gave a single, deliberate nod, his eyes carrying the silent but firm encouragement. You've got this. Charlotte rose to her feet, her pale blue dress fanned lightly as she made her way into the stage. The soft tap of her shoes on the polished wooden floor echoed with startling clarity in the sudden hush. The orchestra stopped. The low murmur of conversation vanished. Even the faint clink of glasses died away, replaced by a silence so thick one could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the room. This was no longer idle curiosity, it was a taut, expectant waiting. Some guests, veterans of countless royal galas, recognized the rarity of such a moment, unscripted, uncalculated, and therefore capable of becoming either legendary or disastrous. Charlotte reached the lectern. She paused, taking a deep breath. Her eyes swept the hall, finding the warm encouragement of her parents, the watchful attention of her grandfather, and the unreadable glimmer in Camilla's gaze. St. James's Palace seemed to be holding its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. Alone waited to hear what might emerge from the lips of a 10-year-old girl, in a space where every word could become a headline by morning. The golden glow of the chandeliers caught in Charlotte's soft brown hair as she stood before them. There was no awkward fidgeting, none of the self-consciousness one might expect from a child her age. Charlotte stood tall, her gaze steady upon a hall filled with some of the most powerful people in the United Kingdom. When she spoke, her voice wasn't raised for attention, it was measured, clear, as though she wanted each word to land exactly where it was meant to. Tonight, I am not here as a princess. I am here as a person just like everyone in this room who believes we can do better for those we forget. Charlotte spoke of faces she had seen on visits with her parents, of a homeless woman who had given her the only sweet she owned, of a boy in a cancer ward who asked if spring might come faster if people smiled at each other more. Each story was brief, but told with a quiet rhythm that seemed to hold the entire room in suspension. Then she stopped, her eyes suddenly alight with an unexpected firmness for one so young, swept across the crowd. Kindness is not charity. It is justice. And everyone deserves that. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. This was no hollow slogan, but a truth spoken from a young heart that had already seen more than people might imagine. Charlotte's voice did not tremble, but in every word there was the deep resonance of empathy and inheritance from Diana's compassion and the careful upbringing of William and Catherine. What stood out most was that Charlotte used no theatrical tricks. She did not raise her voice for effect, nor stamp her foot for emphasis. Instead, she let sincerity do the work. Every direct gaze, every pause between sentences, became an invisible thread pulling her closer to each soul in the room. You could see Camilla tilt her head ever so slightly, her eyes blinking as if to wonder whether a child could truly grasp the weight of what she had just said. Charles sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly together. William and Catherine, by contrast, kept their eyes fixed on their daughter, unable to hide the pride in their gaze. When Charlotte finished, there was no immediate burst of applause. Instead, a pause long, deep, and heavy with meaning before the entire room slowly rose to its feet. This wasn't applause for a performance. It was an acknowledgement that, from the lips of a 10-year-old, they had just been reminded of something adults often forget. Kindness is not a gift bestowed from above, but a right that everyone deserves. At the moment Charlotte stepped up to the lectern, Camilla had sat perfectly still, her back straight, her face holding the calm poise honed over decades in the public eye. No smile, no frown, just a carefully neutral mask. Yet, with each story Charlotte told, with each look of unfiltered sincerity in her young eyes, the mask began to crack, not dramatically, but like small waves steadily wearing away at a rock that had long resisted the tide. When Charlotte spoke of those we forget, it wasn't just the audience who noticed a flicker in the queen consort's eyes. They also saw her hands tighten in her lap until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't the gesture of someone cold or indifferent, but of someone holding back a slow-burning unease, as if the words had reached a place she had hoped no one would see. At the line, kindness is not charity. It is justice, Montgomery. Camilla leaned forward ever so slightly, lips pressed together. A quick, almost imperceptible breath escaped so fast it seemed she wished to catch it before it was heard. This was not the reaction of someone politely enduring a speech. It was the reaction of someone drawn into a memory, or confronted with a question for which she had no ready answer. When the standing ovation came, Camilla rose too, but half a beat later than the rest. She clapped, but her eyes did not rest on William and Catherine's daughter. Instead, she looked down at the floor, as if weighing something in her mind. Not long after the program resumed, she left the room. No announcement, no official explanation. Only the image of her slipping quietly into the corridor. The dark blue folds of her gown swaying behind her, her steps quicker than usual. Speculation spread quickly. Had Charlotte unintentionally touched a nerve? Did her words about the invisible stir memories of years when Camilla herself was treated as a shadow, or of times when her very existence was denied? Or, perhaps deeper still, did they prompt an abrupt reflection on her own legacy, how she would be remembered? When the time inevitably came to step away, Camilla revealed nothing. Yet, to the sharp-eyed, that evening marked a rare moment. A woman who had weathered the fiercest political storms of royal life, who had faced the press in the weight of public judgment, was moved, not by a statesman or a soaring orator, but by the clear, steady voice of a 10-year-old girl. Perhaps that was Charlotte's quiet power at the gala, not simply to stir the audience's hearts, but to force even the most powerful to see themselves in her mirror. What stood out most was not that Charlotte had been chosen to speak in her parents' place, but that she had not spoken for anyone at all. Every word, every pause, every look carried the mark of her own voice, unborrowed, unfiltered. She wasn't practicing her role as a princess from some carefully written script. She was stating, I have something to say, and I believe it deserves to be heard. In that moment, she became, almost by accident, the face of a generation growing up in the 21st century, a generation no longer content to be dazzled by the crown alone, but demanding authenticity, transparency, and accountability from those at the top. They don't want polished platitudes honed by layers of approval. They want sincerity, the kind Charlotte offered when she spoke of the invisible. Inside the palace, the reaction was an unusual mix. Some long-serving staff veterans of hundreds of royal events quietly wiped away tears in the corner when the speech ended. They were moved not just by the message, but by the realization that the next generation would not simply walk in old footsteps. Charlotte had opened a door, and once open, such a door is not easily closed. Yet there were also worried glances and discreetly furrowed brows. A few advisors murmured about the precedent this might set. In a world where every royal word is usually weighed with painstaking care before being uttered, a young princess standing up to deliver unedited thoughts was a bold, perhaps even risky step. Even so, amid the quiet debates, there was one truth no one could deny: this was a step forward. Charlotte's presence that evening had softened the distance between the monarchy and the people. No longer was it just about the solemn balcony photographs or tea parties reserved for the upper crust. Instead, it was the image of a 10-year-old girl, feet firmly on the ground, eyes looking straight ahead, and a heart large enough to hold the stories so many grown-ups had chosen to overlook. Perhaps this was what truly shook St. James's Palace, not because someone had broken a rule, but because a little princess had proved that, in this new era, the greatest power does not lie in the throne, but in the ability to reach the human heart. From the moment she could speak, Charlotte had been raised by William and Catherine under a clear principle: to be a royal is to serve Monarch, not merely to appear in beautiful photographs. They wanted their daughter to understand that the crown is not just a symbol of power and privilege, but a burden of responsibility. Responsibility towards the ordinary people she would meet along the way. More than once, the media had caught glimpses of Charlotte accompanying her mother to children's hospitals, carrying small toys and a radiant smile. Catherine would often crouch down to her daughter's eye level and gently remind her, "Look into their eyes, listen to them, and remember that everyone has a story." William, calm yet resolute, taught her how to shake hands with a veteran and ask about their years of service, rather than simply smiling and walking on. Charlotte grew up in a home where the story of Granny Diana was never hidden away. She learned about a woman who dared to bridge the gap between the monarchy and the public, a woman who embraced HIV/AIDS patients when the world was still full of prejudice, who knelt on a street curb to speak to a homeless child. Catherine once told her, "Kindness doesn't need a microphone, but sometimes it will echo louder than any speech." Many of the family's charitable visits took place far from the flash of cameras. Often, William and Catherine would take Charlotte to temporary shelters or struggling neighborhoods without notifying the press. There, she saw the real faces, the grateful eyes, the calloused hands, the silent tears. Slowly, Charlotte came to realize that the title of princess was the smallest part of her identity. The greater part was using her voice to change something, no matter how small. What was special about William and Catherine's approach was that they never let royal duty crush her childhood. She still ran barefoot in the garden, still giggled while playing with George and little Louis, still spent cozy nights under a blanket watching films with her family. That balance of love and discipline shaped a Charlotte who was both gentle and strong, a child who knew how to listen and how to speak up. All of it, the hospital visits, the stories of Diana, the ordinary family moments, prepared Charlotte to stand in front of hundreds of watchful eyes that night without trembling. In that moment, the ballroom at St. James's Palace saw not just a 10-year-old girl, but the seed of a young woman who would carry both the heart and the responsibility of a new royal symbol. In the long history of the British monarchy, where every word is weighed and every movement rehearsed, the sight of a young royal stepping up to deliver an unscripted speech was almost unthinkable. To many within the palace, it was a shock, like a sudden gust of wind flinging open velvet curtains that had stayed shut for centuries. In the seconds after she finished, the air hung heavy with a silence that was both astonished and restless, enough for discreet glances between senior royal officials to speak volumes. Someone whispered, "She's broken protocol." But the real question was never whether she had breached the rules, it was why this had happened, and why it had struck so deeply. Charlotte chose not to take the safe road of carefully crafted platitudes. She spoke from the heart about kindness, justice, and the invisible people, a subject few dared address openly in the ceremonial confines of a royal charity gala. To some of the palace's more traditional advisors, it was the sign of a dangerous precedent if a 10-year-old princess could decide her own words. What other boundaries might be blurred in the future? But for the Prince and Princess of Wales, it was living proof of the modern vision. They have worked so hard to build a monarchy more connected, candid, and human than ever before. They understood that the power of the monarchy in the 21st century no longer rests in ancient stone walls or glittering ceremony, but in the ability to touch the human heart and reflect the values society yearns for. And Charlotte, with a child's innocence, yet an unmistakable strength, had done just that. No director, no script, only truth and belief in her own words. From this perspective, Charlotte's bending of protocol was not an act of rebellion, but a reminder that tradition should never be a set of chains. And it was the way the new generation of royals, led by William and Catherine, sought to breathe fresh life into an institution centuries old. And if the audience's deeply emotional reaction that evening was any indication, the public was ready for a different kind of royalty, less encumbered by elaborate rituals, but richer in truth and sincerity. Within hours of the gala at St. James's Palace ending, clips of Princess Charlotte's speech began to surface on social media, first shaky, hurried videos taken by guests, then quickly picked up by major news outlets with headlines like 10-year-old Princess Moves the Monarchy and Charlotte's Speech That Silenced Britain. From the BBC and The Guardian to the New York Times, the story ran everywhere, but the real force of it was not confined to traditional media. It exploded across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, where Charlotte's words were shared millions of times under the hashtag #JusticeNotCharity. Something remarkable happened when the speech was not just heard, but felt. A teacher in Liverpool recounted how, the very next day, her pupils' children who had never cared about the monarchy were debating Charlotte's line, "Kindness is not charity, it is justice." One group even began planning a fundraiser for their local shelter, explaining, "Princess Charlotte said everyone deserves justice, so we want to do our part." Perhaps the most moving story came from a man who had once been homeless in Manchester. In a letter to Kensington Palace, he wrote that he had watched the speech on his phone at a public library, and for the first time in years, he felt as though someone had truly seen him. "Thank you for saying we are not invisible," he wrote. "I cried, but it was the kind of crying that comes from hope." The ripple effect went far beyond emotion. Charities reported a surge in donations in the week following the speech. One London homeless support fund said its online contributions had tripled, with many accompanied by messages like, "Charlotte inspired this." Inevitably, the press drew comparisons between Charlotte and Princess Diana, the grandmother she never met, whose legacy of compassion still threads through every royal story. Both shared the rare gift of making distant issues feel close and personal. But unlike Diana, an icon of a pre-social media age, Charlotte is growing up in a world where a message can circle the globe in seconds. Commentators observed that if Diana was the people's princess, Charlotte has the potential to be the princess of justice, an image built not only on empathy, but on a call to action. And as the footage of her stepping down from the podium, head bowed slightly, eyes bright with purpose, continued to appear on screens across the world, it became clear we might have just witnessed the opening of a new chapter in the British monarchy, one ushered in by the clear, unwavering voice of a 10-year-old girl. In the days after the speech, Kensington Palace was engulfed in a storm not of scandal, but of envelopes, emails, and messages of congratulations. Letters poured in from every corner of the globe, from small towns in England to far-flung cities in Canada, Australia, and even South Africa. Parents sent photos of their children writing, "Kindness is not charity, it is justice," on classroom boards. Elderly residents in care homes recounted how they had wept listening to Charlotte. Social activists extended invitations for her to visit their projects. What was striking was that every letter, every line, no longer saw Charlotte merely as a little princess in a ball gown and glittering tiara. A new image had taken shape, a young girl with a citizen's awareness, a voice both candid and brimming with compassion. At just 10 years old, Charlotte had achieved what many royals spend decades striving for: touching hearts, and reshaping the way people think about the monarchy's role in modern society. This shift was not only visible among the public, it had begun to seep into the ancient walls of the palace itself. Royal advisors were now seriously discussing whether Charlotte could become the face of a new generation, a generation that would not only preserve tradition, but dare to question it and push for reform. Though many years would pass before she took on any official role, there was near unanimous agreement the path had already been laid. Looking ahead, observers predicted that Charlotte would not be boxed in by rigid ceremonial duties. With the grounding instilled by William and Catherine, who have taught her that power comes with responsibility, she would continue to attend charitable events, not simply to cut ribbons, but to listen, to talk, and to drive action. Many organizations had already expressed their wish for her return, particularly those serving children, vulnerable women, and forgotten communities. Perhaps what makes Charlotte stand out most is her unfeigned sincerity. There was no prepared speech, no elaborate staging, only a child speaking about what she believed. And in an age when the public is increasingly skeptical of polished, carefully packaged messages, that plain-spoken truth has become her most powerful weapon. One commentator wrote, "If this is the future of the British monarchy, then perhaps it is brighter than we imagine." And as the image of Charlotte smiling and bowing in thanks to the audience lingered in the memories of millions, a quiet question arose. Had we just witnessed not only the coming of age of a young girl, but the first stirrings of a true leader? Charlotte's speech at the Royal Charity Gala did not merely close a glittering evening. It opened an unexpected new chapter in royal history. In that moment, beneath the golden glow of St. James Palace, people saw not just a 10-year-old princess, but a potential symbol, a green shoot growing in the ancient garden of tradition. She wasn't reciting a script or repeating platitudes. She was lighting a flame straight from her heart. And so a question echoes in the minds of millions. Could Charlotte become the torchbearer for a new kind of monarchy? A torch not of gold or silver, but of compassion, sincerity, and the belief that all people, whoever they are, wherever they come from, deserve to be treated with fairness. Kensington Palace may continue to manage Charlotte's public image carefully, but the people have seen, have heard, and have believed. Her appearance was not a fleeting bright spot. It was a reminder that if the monarchy is to endure and evolve, it must forge deeper connections with the hearts of its people. Charlotte, together with William and Catherine, may well be the bridge between tradition and new aspiration, between the palace's ancient walls and the turbulent world beyond. Yet this is not solely the royal family's story. It is also ours, the story of those who watch, those who hope, and those who will ultimately judge the future by action, not words. So, what do you think? Will Charlotte truly bring fresh winds to the monarchy? Or will this be remembered as a beautiful moment that fades away? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you, whether you agree or remain skeptical. If you found this story inspiring, hit like, share it so more people can read it, and subscribe so you don't miss our in-depth analyses of royal events. And if you want to understand why Charlotte was able to stand so firm and shine so brightly, I invite you to watch our related video on the journey of William and Catherine from university sweethearts to modern leaders shaping the monarchy's future. Because perhaps, to understand the torch, we must first know where the flame began.